Hands behind your back now." The officer's bark ricocheted through the terminal like a steel door slamming shut. Conversations died mid-sentence. Children stopped fidgeting. Phones lifted in unison, their cold lenses glittering like a constellation of judgment. At Gate C14 of Kennedy International, the calm of boarding had been replaced with a courtroom silence. Dozens of passengers watched as a black man in a dark overcoat, neatly trimmed beard silvered with age, was yanked forward, his wrists forced together in cold metal. He did not resist. He did not plead. He stood there, breathing evenly, eyes steady. His stillness only made the scene more unbearable, because stillness in that moment was defiance. The officer repeated, louder this time, "This gate isn't for you. Step aside." His words cracked like a whip across the tiled floor. The crowd flinched. A woman near the front gasped. A man shook his head, muttering under his breath, but no one intervened, at least not yet. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below, and if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to him. The man's suitcase lay tipped against the wall, its handle bent awkwardly, as if even his belongings had been accused. The overhead screens blinked with flight numbers, indifferent to the humiliation playing out beneath them. From the crowd came a voice, young, uncertain, but carrying. He showed his boarding pass. I saw it. Heads turned. Another voice, sharper. Then why the cuffs? Murmurs swelled like an incoming tide, suspicion turning outward, no longer just toward the man, but toward the badge that restrained him. The officer ignored them, his jaw clenched, his grip tightened. Fraud, he hissed, low but audible. People like you don't belong in first class. Not here, not anywhere. Phones caught every syllable. The air thickened. The man's expression didn't break no anger, no fear. Only a faint, almost imperceptible smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, as though he had been here before, as though this scene was a rerun in a long life of reruns. He lifted his head slowly, scanning the sea of faces, some outraged, some silent, some recording. In that moment, he wasn't just a passenger in handcuffs. He was a mirror, and the room was being forced to look at itself. 10 minutes earlier, no one would have noticed him. He walked into Terminal C carrying nothing more than a compact black carry-on, the kind of bag you see hundreds of times a day in an airport. His coat was clean but not expensive, his shoes polished but practical. He could have been a professor, a grandfather on his way to see family, or simply a man returning home. That was intentional. For Marcus Hale, appearance was armor. Years of meetings in boardrooms had taught him that the loudest wealth draws the cheapest assumptions. So today he dressed down, blending in, almost invisible. What the crowd didn't know, what even the officer didn't care to ask, was that Marcus wasn't just another traveler. He was the majority shareholder of Atlantic Skies, the very airline boarding at Gate C14. No entourage, no chauffeur, no tailored suit, just Marcus, moving through the airport as though anonymity itself was his disguise. When he reached the gate, the attendant glanced at his boarding pass and waved him through without a word. First class, seat 2 Ampere. Nothing unusual. But then came the pause, the way the attendant's eyes lingered too long on his name, then flicked to his coat, his shoes, his skin. A tiny hesitation, quickly smoothed over with a forced smile. Marcus noticed. He always noticed. He took a seat near the window, the light from the tarmac spilling across his face. He opened his phone, scanning through a report from the airline's ethics committee, ironically, a file about staff complaints of discriminatory behavior. It was supposed to be reviewed at next week's board meeting, but life had a way of accelerating its own agenda. 2 rows behind, a whisper, "That guy doesn't look first class," followed by a chuckle. Marcus didn't turn around. He'd heard it before, in lobbies, in lounges, in restaurants he owned. The words always sounded the same, like echoes from a script written decades earlier. He remembered his first business flight 25 years ago. Same suspicion, different uniform. Back then, the gate agent told him his ticket must have been a mistake. He'd been forced to wait until every other passenger boarded. The shame had burned, but it also hardened into fuel. Today, that fuel had become power, power disguised in silence. At Gate C14, passengers began lining up, clutching passports and phones. A family argued over snacks. A toddler cried. A businesswoman tapped furiously at her laptop. Ordinary chaos, the kind airports thrive on. Marcus blended into it, unnoticed, unbothered, until the officer appeared. Boots heavy on the tile, uniform crisp, eyes sharp with suspicion before a word was even spoken. The attendant pointed too quickly, too eagerly toward Marcus. And in that instant, the ordinary chaos shifted into something else entirely. "Sir, stand up." The words came flat, unblinking. The officer's hand hovered close to his holster, not drawn but heavy with threat. Passengers shifted in their seats. A few reached for their phones, not out of habit but instinct, the collective sense that something unjust was about to unfold. Marcus didn't move. He simply looked up, eyes calm, voice measured. "Is there a problem?" The gate attendant, the same one who'd scanned his pass minutes earlier, stepped forward. Her tone was rehearsed, clipped. "We've received reports of suspicious activity. We'll need you to verify your ticket again." Reports. That word echoed louder than her voice. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Suspicious activity?" I sat down. Murmurs stirred. A young man in a baseball cap muttered to his friend. "He literally just walked in." The friend whispered back, "Watch, this is gonna blow up." The officer bent down, close enough that his words carried to the first two rows. "Show me ID, now." Marcus reached calmly into his coat pocket and produced both his license and boarding pass. He offered them without hesitation. The officer snatched them, scanning, frowning. The attendant leaned over his shoulder, whispering something Marcus couldn't catch, but her smirk was clear. From the crowd, a woman's voice rose. "He already showed his pass. I saw it." Her phone was up, recording, the red light glowing like a warning flare. The officer ignored her. He shook his head slowly, as if performing disbelief. "This doesn't add up," he muttered, louder this time. Then, with a deliberate turn toward the waiting passengers, "We may have a fraud attempting to board first class." Gasps rippled. A toddler cried louder. Somewhere in the back, a man cursed under his breath. Marcus sat still, hands folded, face unreadable. The cuffs hadn't yet clicked, but the narrative had been locked in place, guilty until proven otherwise. The attendant crossed her arms, confidence swelling now that the officer stood beside her. "Remove him from the gate," she said, her voice rising above the murmurs. "He doesn't belong here." Phones lifted higher. A chorus of beeps and clicks filled the air, like a room full of tiny witnesses. The officer snapped the boarding pass shut, holding it like evidence. "Sir, if you don't comply, we'll have to detain you." Marcus didn't flinch, didn't argue. His eyes traveled over the crowd rows of strangers whose judgment had been summoned without consent. He saw outrage in some faces, indifference in others, and quiet agreement in a few who nodded along with authority. In that silence, he understood what was happening. Not a mistake, not a mix-up, a performance. A show of power at his expense. And the curtain had just risen. The officer's hand hovered inches above Marcus's shoulder, ready to seize. The crowd leaned forward, bracing for conflict. But Marcus didn't give them one. He inhaled slowly, the kind of breath you take before stepping into cold water. His eyes closed, then opened again, steady, fixed not on the officer but on the horizon beyond the terminal window. Planes rolled across the tarmac, engines roaring, indifferent to the storm gathering inside Gate C14. "Sir," the officer barked again, voice louder, "stand up now." Marcus folded his hands over his lap, his posture relaxed, almost regal. He didn't move, he didn't resist. And in that silence, the room grew louder, shoes tapping, whispers spreading, phones chiming as live streams went live. The gate attendant scoffed. "See? He won't cooperate. That tells you everything." Her words shot out like arrows, meant to pierce, to confirm suspicion. But Marcus didn't take the bait. His stillness was his shield. A woman near the window whispered, "Why isn't he saying anything?" Her friend answered, "Because he doesn't have to. They're the ones shouting." The officer's grip tightened on the boarding pass. He leaned down, his voice low, meant only for Marcus. "If you make me drag you out of here, it won't end pretty." Marcus turned his head, slowly, deliberately. His gaze met the officer's unblinking calm, and he spoke for the first time since the cuffs were threatened. "I am not moving because I don't need to." The officer flinched, not visibly, but enough for the crowd to notice the pause. Authority wasn't supposed to be answered with quiet. Authority expected struggle, shouting, chaos. Instead, Marcus gave him stillness, like a mirror reflecting his own aggression back at him. Someone in the back called out, "He's calm. You're the ones escalating." The tension shifted, subtle but real. The officer's jaw tightened. The attendant shot back, "Stay out of this!" But it was too late. The narrative was cracking. Marcus straightened slightly in his seat, his voice carrying now not loud but resonant. "You accused me without cause. You dragged my name in front of strangers. And still, I sit." The words landed heavy. A few passengers nodded, murmuring agreement. Phones tilted closer, zooming in. The officer's hand finally moved not to strike, but to fumble with the cuffs at his belt. Metal clinked against leather, sharp and invasive. He held them up for the crowd to see, as though proof of his authority. Marcus's response? Silence. He didn't recoil, didn't plead. His stillness spread through the gate like frost creeping over glass. And in that silence, the injustice became louder than any shout could have been. The first voice didn't come from Marcus. It came from the crowd. "I saw him check in." A teenager near the boarding line shouted, his phone raised high. "His ticket scanned green. I saw it with my own eyes." Heads turned. More phones lifted. Red lights blinked across the gate like fireflies in a storm. The officer froze, cuffs still dangling from his hand. The attendant snapped back. "Stay quiet. This doesn't concern you." But it did. It concerned everyone now. From row 3, a middle-aged woman wearing a blue scarf stood up, her voice trembling but loud enough to carry, "Why are you treating him like a criminal? He hasn't even raised his voice." The words cracked the atmosphere. Passengers murmured, restless. Some shifted closer, angling for a better view. One man muttered into his live stream, "This is bias." Live at Gate C14. Comments poured in, little hearts and angry faces scrolling across his screen. A young mother held her toddler tight, whispering to the child, "Remember this. This is wrong." The child didn't understand, but the room did. The officer gritted his teeth. "Everyone step back. This is a security matter." But security mattered to them too. Not the badge kind, the human kind. A man in a business suit, gray, tired, clearly a frequent flyer, raised his voice. "I've been flying this airline for 20 years. I've never seen someone cuffed for sitting in first class. What's your real reason?" Silence. Only the hum of the terminal air system and the clatter of a rolling suitcase somewhere behind the gate. The question hung in the air like smoke. The attendant tried to smother it. "Policy," she snapped. "We follow policy." But another passenger cut her off. "Policy doesn't look like this. This looks like prejudice." Phones captured every angle the officer's clenched jaw, the attendant's crossed arms, Marcus's calm posture, the growing chorus of voices rising around them. The narrative was no longer one-sided. It was contested, documented, undeniable. And through it all, Marcus remained silent. His stillness drew the witnesses in, pulling their voices forward. He didn't need to plead. The crowd was beginning to speak for him. A young man in a hoodie whispered to his live stream audience, "This isn't just about a seat. This is about dignity." His words rippled, echoed by viewers piling into the chat. Dignity, respect, justice. For the first time, the officer glanced at the growing wall of cameras aimed his way. His authority wasn't shrinking, but it was being watched. And that, more than anything, made him uneasy. The room had changed. This was no longer a man versus a badge. This was a man versus a system and an audience unwilling to stay silent. The officer's patience snapped. His voice cracked through the gate like a whip. "Everyone put your phones down. This is a federal matter." But no one moved. Screens only tilted higher, catching every line on his face, every flicker of unease. The crowd wasn't afraid anymore. They were witnesses, and witnesses don't retreat. The gate attendant seized the moment, stepping forward with forced confidence. Her blazer straightened, her chin lifted. "Remove him now," she ordered the officer, her voice sharp and sure. "He's not first-class material." The words cut sharper than any accusation yet. Not fraud, not suspicious, but not material. As if Marcus were fabric, judged by its weave, rejected by its color. A collective gasp rippled. A passenger near the back muttered, "She really said that?" Another answered, "I got it on video." The officer clicked the cuffs open with a metallic snap. The sound echoed, harsh, final. He grabbed Marcus's wrist. Still, Marcus didn't resist. He let the cold steel circle his skin, his silence louder than protest. That silence drove the crowd restless. "He hasn't done anything," someone shouted. "This is discrimination," another cried. The attendant's smirk widened. "If you people knew how many scams we stop every week," she let the words trail, leaving the implication heavy in the air. A woman near the window rose from her seat, fury shaking her voice. "Stop pretending this is about policy. We all saw it. He showed his pass. He showed his ID. The only thing you don't like is how he looks." Applause burst, scattered but real. The officer's grip faltered for a second under the noise. He barked back, "Quiet down, or you'll all be removed." But the crowd wasn't shrinking. They were swelling closer, louder, braver. Phones rose like torches in a protest, shining judgment onto every word, every action. And in the middle of it, Marcus remained still, wrists bound, coat pressed against the hard plastic of the chair, calm, waiting, almost as though he knew the moment was not his to rush, but theirs to unravel. The attendant leaned down, voice low but venomous. "This is where it ends for you. No more pretending." Marcus turned his head, eyes meeting hers. No anger, no fear. Just that faint smile again, like a man who had already read the ending of the story. And the crowd felt it too, that something bigger was coming. With one sharp motion, he yanked Marcus to his feet and shoved him against the wall beside the boarding door. The thud carried across the gate, echoing above the airport announcements and rolling suitcase wheels. Gasps broke out like glass shattering. "Fraud like you," the officer hissed, pressing his forearm against Marcus's shoulder. "Don't fly business, let alone first class." The words weren't just an accusation. They were a verdict, delivered before any trial. The attendant stood taller now, emboldened. "You're holding up real guests," she spat. "People who actually belong here." Phones zoomed closer. A chorus of disbelief swelled. Someone shouted, "He paid for that ticket!" Another voice rose, trembling with outrage. "You're humiliating him in front of children." But humiliation was exactly the point. The officer pushed harder, metal cuffs biting into Marcus's skin. The attendant leaned in close, her words sugar-coated with disdain. "Did you really think a black coat and calm face would fool anyone? You don't belong in this section, not ever." Silence spread for a heartbeat, heavy and suffocating. Then came the crack of indignation from the crowd. "This is racism!" a man yelled, his live stream capturing every syllable. "You're out of line," cried a woman, her toddler clutched against her chest. "You don't treat people like this," muttered the businessman in gray, this time louder, his voice trembling with controlled rage. The officer ignored them all. He pressed Marcus harder into the wall, his voice carrying now for the entire gate to hear, "If you people knew how many times we've stopped thieves like him." The insult wasn't subtle anymore. It was raw, sharpened to draw blood. But Marcus, his head steady against the cold plaster, cuffs biting at his wrists, didn't break. He didn't shout. He didn't flinch. His silence screamed louder than their words. The crowd's outrage grew louder, waves colliding against authority. Dozens of cameras now streamed the same scene. A black man shoved against an airport wall, accused not for what he did, but for who he was. The attendant smirked again, raising her voice for all to hear. "Go back to economy where you belong." And that was it. The line that couldn't be unsaid. The sentence that shifted the room. Because when the air is thick with injustice, sometimes all it takes is one phrase to ignite a fire. And in Gate C14, that fire had just been lit. The cuffs bit into his wrists, the wall cold against his back. But Marcus didn't resist. He didn't shout. Instead, he lifted his chin, a quiet smile cutting through the chaos like a blade of light. The officer sneered. "What are you smiling at?" Marcus's voice came calm, even measured. "At how predictable this island." The crowd stirred. Phones leaned in. The stillness around him felt different now, not passive, not defeated, but deliberate, like a man choosing the exact second to reveal his cards. He tilted his head, speaking not to the officer but to the small black phone in his pocket. "Rachel," he said, his tone clear enough for half the gate to hear. On the other end, a voice answered instantly through his wireless earpiece. Crisp, professional, female. "Yes, Mr. Hale." Gasps rippled. Someone whispered, "He's got a team?" Another muttered, "Wait, who is this guy?" Marcus didn't look at the crowd. He kept his eyes locked on the officer. "Activate Protocol A7. Send confirmation to the board. Flag this gate, this officer, and the attendant. Live feed only. Rachel's reply was immediate, steady as steel. Already transmitting, sir. The board is connected. The officer's grip faltered. What the hell does that mean? He demanded. The attendant scoffed. Some con artist with a fake assistant app. Ignore it. But the crowd wasn't ignoring anything. Their phones buzzed, notifications lighting up. A hashtag flickered across screens. Number Gate C14 climbing in real time. Marcus's voice carried now, resonant, controlled. You accuse without evidence, you shame without proof, and still, you forget one truth. He paused. The silence thickened. Dozens leaned forward, breath caught. This airline answers to me. The officer blinked. The attendant laughed, sharp and dismissive. You're bluffing. But passengers didn't laugh. A man in the back gasped. Wait, Hale? As in Marcus Hale? His voice cracked with recognition. The CEO? The one who... He didn't finish. He didn't need to. The name was enough. The room shifted. Doubt rippled not toward Marcus, but toward the ones who bound him. The officer tightened his grip on Marcus's arm, trying to hold authority in his hands. But authority was slipping grain by grain into the crowd, into the cameras, into the truth now spreading beyond the gate. Marcus's calm wasn't just defiance anymore. It was strategy. It was the first move in a game the officer didn't even realize had begun. The officer froze, cuffs still clamped around Marcus's wrists. The crowd buzzed, whispers rising like static in a storm. The attendant folded her arms, scoffing louder now, clinging to authority that was slipping through her fingers. Enough, she snapped. You're not special. You're a liar with a fake name. Marcus finally lifted his head fully, his eyes scanning the sea of raised phones. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His voice carried with the gravity of someone used to rooms listening when he spoke. You just handcuffed the majority shareholder of this airline. The gate fell silent. For a moment, even the overhead intercom seemed to pause. Gasps rippled through the passengers. Someone whispered, Majority shareholder? Another muttered, That's not possible, is it? The businessman in gray pushed forward, his phone still recording. Marcus Hale. I knew I recognized him. He owns a quarter of Atlantic Skies. His voice shook with awe. You just put cuffs on your boss. The officer's face blanched. The attendant blinked hard, her smirk gone. But Marcus wasn't done. He turned slightly toward the nearest phone camera, the faint smile still on his lips. This isn't the first time someone's tried to erase me from a seat I paid for, but this time you picked the wrong man. Cheers broke out from the back. A woman raised her fist. Tell them! Another voice shouted. Justice, right here, right now! The attendant sputtered. This is a stunt. She glanced at the officer. Don't believe him. He's bluffing. But the truth was already bigger than her denial. Phones pinged with search results. Articles, press photos, stock reports all bearing Marcus's name and face. The digital world confirmed what the crowd now knew. The man in cuffs was not an imposter. He was power, bound only by their arrogance. Marcus tilted his head toward the officer, his words precise, each one like a blade. You've humiliated me in front of the very people who fly my planes, sit in my lounges, and invest in my company. And you did it on camera. The officer swallowed, his grip loosening. The cuffs clinked under the weight of hesitation. The attendant's voice cracked. You can't just... Marcus cut her off without raising his tone. I don't need to raise my voice. My silence carries farther than your authority ever will. And in that moment, the balance shifted completely. The man who looked ordinary minutes ago stood revealed not just a passenger, but the owner of the sky above them. The revelation hit like a storm. Phones buzzed with push notifications, headlines already catching fire. CEO of Atlantic Skies detained at own gate. Streams climbed into the tens of thousands. Comments poured in. Disbelief, outrage, vindication. The officer's hand dropped from Marcus's arm as though burned. His jaw clenched, but his eyes betrayed panic. Panic of a man realizing he had cuffed not just a traveler, but his employer. The gate attendant's confidence crumbled. Her arms, once crossed in defiance, now trembled against her chest. This can't be real, she stammered. He doesn't look... She cut herself off, but the words hung in the air like poison. Passengers erupted. Some jeered, others applauded. A man in a baseball cap shouted, "How's that for first-class material?" A woman near the window raised her phone higher. "The whole world is watching you squirm." The businessman in gray shook his head slowly, his voice carrying weight. "You've humiliated the very man who signs your checks. That's not just prejudice, it's career suicide." The officer tried to salvage his authority, his voice breaking under the pressure. We were following protocol." But the crowd cut him off, a wall of voices. "Lies. You tore up his dignity in front of us. Protocol doesn't look like this." The attendant's face drained of color. She whispered to herself, barely audible, "He owns the airline." Marcus stood taller, even with the cuffs biting into his wrists. His calm presence filled the gate like gravity, pulling every eye toward him. He didn't raise a hand, but the room moved around his silence. Passengers who had hesitated before now stepped forward, forming a loose half-circle of protection. A young woman with a stroller positioned herself between Marcus and the officer. "You're not dragging him anywhere," she said, voice trembling but resolute. The officer looked at the crowd, dozens of witnesses, hundreds more online, and for the first time, he saw the collapse of control. The attendant whispered harshly, trying to salvage pride. This will all blow over." But the businessman snapped back. "Number this will define you." Phones chimed again. Streams hit 50,000 viewers. The tide was irreversible. The people who had tried to erase Marcus now stood erased themselves, authority stripped bare, credibility shattered. And Marcus? He hadn't moved more than a breath. Yet the entire gate revolved around him. The cuffs still clung to his wrists, but Marcus no longer looked bound. He stood at the center of Gate C14 like a judge about to deliver a sentence. The officer shifted uneasily. The attendant wrung her hands, pale and desperate. The crowd waited, breathless. Marcus tilted his head, speaking softly, almost like a teacher correcting a student. "You thought humiliation was power. But power doesn't humiliate. Power decides." He turned his face slightly, his voice steady but loud enough for every phone to catch. "Rachel." The earpiece crackled. "Yes, Mr. Hale?" "Terminate access. Effective immediately. Officer Daniels and Attendant Brooks. Freeze their credentials. Notify HR and legal. They are relieved of duty. Ender." The crowd gasped as his words echoed through the gate. The officer frowned, confused. "What are you—" But before he could finish, his radio beeped once, then went silent. He pressed the button again, nothing. The screen on his belt flashed red. Access revoked. He tried again, his voice rising. "Dispatch, come in," static answered. The attendant pulled out her badge, swiping it against the security pad by the boarding door. Instead of the usual green light, it blinked crimson. Access denied. She tried again. Red. Again. Red. Panic swept across her face. The businessman in gray laughed under his breath. "It's already happening." Marcus lifted his hands slightly, the cuffs glinting in the terminal light. "Unlock them," he said calmly. The officer hesitated, jaw tight. "You can't order me." Marcus cut him off with a single line, his voice colder now. "You don't work here anymore." The silence was suffocating. Even the flight announcements above seemed to pause. A ripple of murmurs swept through the crowd. Phones shook as people recorded every second. The young man live streaming whispered into his mic. "He just fired them. Right here at the gate." The officer's hand trembled. Slowly, reluctantly, he reached for the key on his belt. With a click, the cuffs sprang open. Marcus rubbed his wrists, the faint marks like evidence of a trial that had just ended. The attendant tried one last time. "You don't have the right." Marcus turned, his eyes cutting into her. "The right? You forgot who writes your paychecks. You forgot who built this airline from nothing but late nights and refused meetings. And today, you forgot dignity." Her words died in her throat. Marcus glanced back at the crowd. Dozens of phones recording, thousands of eyes watching online. His tone shifted, not angry, not vengeful, but resolute. "Let this be clear. Disrespect has consequences. Prejudice has consequences. And those who use a badge to humiliate will leave with nothing but shame." The businessman in gray stepped forward, nodding. "That's justice." Cheers broke out. Applause thundered across the gate, filling the terminal louder than any announcement could. A woman lifted her child onto her hip and said softly, "Remember this moment." The officer stood frozen, badge dark, radio dead. The attendant's hands shook, clutching the useless plastic of her access card. Marcus, free now, straightened his coat. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply raised his voice one last time. Escort them out. Security staff, real staff, notified by Rachel, arrived within seconds. They approached quietly, firmly, guiding the disgraced officer and attendant away. The crowd parted like water, phones tracking every step. And in that walk of shame, the roles reversed completely. Minutes ago, Marcus had been the accused. Now, he was the arbiter. The red lights on the officer's badge blinked one last time before going dark. His authority, once shouted, once weaponized, was now nothing more than a dead piece of plastic. The attendant's access card slipped from her hand and clattered on the floor, the sound brittle and final. Security escorted them toward the exit. No applause for their service, no farewell, only silence and the glow of phones capturing their retreat. The crowd parted like a tide around Marcus. People leaned in closer, but no one dared touch him. They didn't see a man anymore. They saw a storm that had passed and left truth standing. Marcus rubbed his wrists where the cuffs had been. Faint red marks etched into his skin. Scars that would fade, but scars nonetheless. He turned slowly, eyes sweeping across the sea of witnesses, each one frozen in the gravity of the moment. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. His voice, calm and steady, filled the gate. "You called me a fraud," he said, looking toward the empty space where the officer had stood. "You shoved me against a wall. You tore my dignity in half like it was paper." He turned toward the space the attendant had vacated. "And you told me I didn't belong here." The gate was silent, the kind of silence that listens. Marcus's eyes softened, not in forgiveness, but in clarity. "Understand this. I didn't need to prove myself to you. I didn't need to argue, because power doesn't shout. Power shows up, and when it does, the world remembers." Gasps and murmurs spread again, this time not of outrage but of awe. A woman near the front clutched her chest, whispering, "He never raised his voice." A man live streaming repeated, "That's real power. That's what it looks like." Marcus glanced toward the passengers who had spoken up: the teenager, the woman in the scarf, the businessman in gray. He nodded once, a silent acknowledgement that they had carried part of the weight before the truth arrived. Then, with a slow exhale, he reached into his coat pocket. From it, he withdrew a slim black wallet and pulled free a platinum business card, heavy, engraved, unmistakable. He held it up, letting the light catch on his name. Marcus Hale, CEO and majority shareholder, Atlantic Skies. Dozens of phones zoomed in, capturing the proof, the final nail in the coffin of doubt. The businessman whispered, "That card could fire us all." Marcus lowered it, slipping it back into his pocket. "I don't need a card to prove who I am," he said. "But sometimes the world needs a reminder." Applause erupted, real applause this time, not scattered, but unified. Passengers stood, clapping, cheering, some with tears in their eyes. The sound roared across the gate, bleeding into the terminal beyond, louder than any announcement on the intercom. A young woman with a stroller raised her phone and shouted into her live stream, "They tried to erase him, but he owns the airline. This is history." Her chat exploded with comments. Legend, justice, dignity. Marcus let the applause wash over him, not basking, not smiling, simply standing steady as though rooted to the floor itself. Then, he raised a hand. The noise softened, then quieted. "I want you all to remember something," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of Gate C14. "What happened here today is not rare. It happens in lobbies, in restaurants, in offices, in schools. The faces change. The uniforms change. The excuse is always the same. Policy, protocol, procedure. But beneath it all is the same lie that dignity can be measured by appearance." He paused, his eyes sweeping the crowd. Some nodded, some wept quietly, some simply listened, frozen. "They mistook silence for weakness," Marcus continued. "But silence was my choice. Silence was my strength. Because dignity does not need to scream. Dignity only needs to endure long enough for truth to arrive." The words hung in the air, heavy and unshakable. Then, with a final exhale, Marcus concluded, "I don't need to record this moment, because I am the result of every moment like it, and I promise you, this will be the last time it happens under my watch." The gate erupted once more, not in chaos, but in solidarity. Applause shook the floor, phones flashed. Passengers who minutes ago had been strangers now felt bound together, united by a story they would carry long after their flight left the runway. Marcus turned, picking up his small black carry-on. The handle clicked back into place, no longer bent. He adjusted his coat, walked calmly toward the boarding door, and for the first time since the ordeal began, the terminal parted for him with respect. The boarding agent at the scanner hesitated, eyes wide, hands trembling. Marcus handed her his ticket, creased, smudged, but valid. She scanned it. The machine beeped green. Marcus looked at her, then at the crowd one last time. His words were simple, final, like a gavel striking. Power doesn't need to shout. It just shows up. And with that, he stepped through the boarding door, leaving behind a gate forever changed.